This is like being moderate on slavery. This is like being moderate on the Nazis. This is the defining issue of our time, and at the pace that we're going right now, the climate crisis will unleash a level of destruction that humans have never seen. You can't be moderate on something like that. You can't be moderate on the end of the world. Hello and welcome to Alien Perspective. For more videos on politics, please subscribe. Today's video is gonna be on the climate deal that just happened in the Senate. We're gonna cover what's in the deal and to what extent is it adequate. If I'm gonna hit you with a climate change video, I gotta do it right. So we gotta set up just how bad the climate emergency is in order to determine to what extent this deal in the Senate, that has not passed the Senate, but is in the Senate, and has been worked out and has Joe Manchin's approval, which is a big deal. To what extent is this deal actually adequate to the problem that we face? Air pollution kills more than 5 million people around the world every year. What else about the climate change? Well, the Middle East is becoming literally uninhabitable. This is one of those where, like, you think about it for 5 seconds, and it's like, oh god, this is really terrible. There's hundreds of millions of people living in the Middle East. That's going to cause a migrant crisis on a level that humans have probably never faced. I can't help but think about India. Cities in India are running out of water. This came out in 2019. It was something like 21 cities. Look at this. 600 million people are dealing with high to extreme water shortages. When you combine the Middle East is running out of water and a giant migrant crisis, and then Indian cities are running out of water, and then you combine that with the tensions between Hindus and Muslims that are happening right now, and I can't help but remember that India and Pakistan both have nuclear weapons. This is from all the way back in 2015. This is a study. Accelerated modern human-induced species loss entering the 6th mass extinction. The last mass extinction on Earth was when the comet wiped out the dinosaurs 66 million years ago. This is the level of destruction we potentially face. It's really, I mean, look at this. It's not just the 6th great mass extinction. I mean, look at it. Rising seas. Florida is about to be wiped off the map. Wait a second. This isn't a bad thing. How did this get in there? Okay, we're talking collapse of civilization is the most likely outcome, according to the top climate scientists. And this is a fun one to look at. Human civilization faces existential risk by 2050, according to a new Australian climate change report. One of the things that scares me most about the climate emergency is that in science, you make a range of predictions, right? So there's anywhere from your best case scenario, and then there's the worst case scenario. And every time scientists make a prediction, you know, the 2005 predictions about how bad 2015 would be, the 2010 predictions about how bad 2021 would be, they give you that range. And whenever that year comes to pass, it's always worse than the worst case scenario. I mean, think about this. 2050. Civilization collapse. By 2050, I won't even be 60 years old. We could see the collapse in human civilization if we don't make major changes, like right now. Alright, so I hope I've adequately set up the problem we face by yelling into a mic on YouTube. So this is the deal in the Senate right now. Imagine this is a movie trailer being read, okay? Major changes in the Affordable Care Act, the nation's biggest ever climate bill, the largest tax hike on corporations in decades, and dozens of lesser-known provisions that will affect millions of Americans. Technically, a climate bill will affect every human that exists today. Technically. The big deal is that Joe Manchin, after getting a ton of pressure, after torpedoing the Build Back Better deal and pretty much everything the Democrats have hoped to do over the last couple of years, he's on board with this. So this is your major coal baron obstacle out of the way. So let's go through this, because you read this and it's like, wow, nation's biggest ever climate bill. As we're about to see, that is more reflective of there's been nothing to compare it to. All right, here's what's in the Inflation Reduction Act. So climate and energy is the overwhelming majority. With the planet rapidly warming, Schumer and Manchin say the bill would reduce carbon emissions by roughly 40% by 2030. 40%. That's pretty significant. Unfortunately, this is an article from 2018, we have 12 years to limit climate change catastrophe, warns UN. In other words, by 2030, the target date we have here, we need to be off greenhouse gas emissions. Like, we need to be moving on from carbon. 40% is great, and it shows you that there are actual, tangible policy related things that make the Biden presidency better than the Trump presidency. All right? Anyone that talks about the Biden and Trump, they're the same evil. No. Reducing carbon emissions by 40% by 2030 is like an earth-alteringly positive change relative to Trump. All right, here we go. This is the Washington Post rundown. Same article. Rundown of what's in it. $260 billion in clean energy tax credits. We've got rebates for green energy vehicles. So in other words, these are like changes around the edges that use the neoliberal framework of you incentivize through tax cuts. The climate crisis will not be solved by individuals putting solar panels on their properties, because just 100 corporations are responsible for 71% of all global emissions. The number one polluter is the United States military. Unfortunately, the free market is just not going to be enough. We're going to need major societal intervention. If the free market was enough, it would have already happened. Okay, rewards in cutting methane emissions. That's huge. Methane is anywhere from 6 to 60 times the potency of carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas emission. Methane is actually one of the biggest worries we should have in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. So that's a big deal. $27 billion green bank would leverage public and private funds to invest in clean energy technologies and infrastructure. So this is good in the sense that this is more than just $27 billion of investment. The idea is that this will kind of steamroll, like what is it? A snowball going down a hill keeps getting bigger. You know the metaphor I'm talking about. Listen, I'm autistic. I don't do metaphors. Support for fossil fuel projects. So here's where we get your awful compromise half-measure bullshit. New oil and gas leasing off the Gulf of Mexico and coast of Alaska, because you gotta get Manchin's vote, because that motherfucker is heavily invested in fossil fuels, so he needs to personally profit. Support for coal miners with black lung. It's a travesty that we haven't already done this. These are people that have sacrificed their body for decades to fuel the world, and they just get left behind. So messed up, man. Agriculture, steel, port, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Corporate minimum tax. This is one of those where, here, are you ready? The single biggest tax hike in the plan would apply to all U.S. corporations that earn $1 billion per year in profits. Under current law, U.S. corporations ostensibly pay ostensibly pay. This is the nominal rate. They're supposed to pay 21%, but all the write-offs, there's dozens of Future 500 corporations that pay zero federal income tax. The plan would close off that option by subjecting corporations to a tax on their statements. So in other words, you can't write off below a certain point. They would still be able to claim tax credits, though, since renewable energy groups raise concerns the minimum tax could undercut the effectiveness of climate tax credits. So in other words, it's a minimum tax, sort of. The environment would be the only one I would be totally fine with giving tax credits to. Okay, this one's also huge. The IRS has been horribly underfunded. So to give billions more to the IRS to make rich people actually pay their taxes and to make corporations pay their taxes, look at this. Between 2010 and 2020, IRS budget was cut by 20%. This is mostly Obama years, not just Trump. Though Trump did cut the IRS funding. Because, people like him don't want to get looked at by the IRS. And then there's some other shit in private equity, whatever. Lowering prescription drug costs. This one seemed really good, and then it's like 10 drugs out of all the drugs that exist. That's what the government will start negotiating. Could scale up to 20 by 2029. Very much depends on which drugs are going to get negotiated. Extending health insurance subsidies, reducing the federal deficit. Okay, sure. What's missing? A bunch of other shit. So is this enough? Well, let's look this up. Bernie Sanders climate plan. How much was he going to spend? Now, Bernie Sanders' plan, I know it's, here we go. 16.3 trillion. This is Vox right here. 16.3 trillion. Now, Bernie Sanders, out of all the candidates, was the only one to get an A rating for his climate plan by literally every single climate group. Some climate groups go really easy and it's like, oh my god, just acknowledging climate change gets you a B. But but then there's organizations like the Sunrise Movement who basically were like, okay, listen, if you're not with it on the science, you can't get an A. Bernie was the only one to get an A. His plan was 16.3 trillion, so we can use that as a rough, roughly that's how much we should be spending in order to adequately meet the crisis that we face. But this deal was $385 billion. Let me see if I can get that number. Here we go. Here's the $385 billion. Okay, let's do a little math here. Oh my god, you're seeing my notes! Ah! $385 billion divided by 16.3 trillion. So this bill is 2.36% of what I would argue it should be. Again, better than nothing, but it by no means lives up to the we have 12 years from the year 2018 to limit climate change catastrophe. Man, listen, with headlines like this, like the climate emergency needs to be everyone's number one issue. What this Schumer-Manchin climate deal is being moderate, less than moderate. What was that number? What was it, 2%? Was it 2% of, this is not a half measure, this is a 2% measure. This is like being moderate on slavery. This is like being moderate on the Nazis. And I mean that. I want those words to shock you. This is like being moderate on slavery. Now, this is like if we were living in the 1850s, okay? And there's a Senate deal that said, hey, we're going to free 1,000 slaves. Now listen, for those 1,000 slaves, that would be like life-altering, oh my god level improvement to their lives. And it would be a major positive for those people. But there'd still be millions of people in slavery. That's kind of how I see this. Where it's like, listen, it's great that we're getting like a 40% reduction in greenhouse gases. But it's nowhere near solving the actual big picture problem. At this point, anyone who votes for someone who is going to go moderate on the climate crisis, who's going to do 2% measures on the climate emergency, I want us to start thinking about them as the modern day equivalent of people who were wishy-washy on slavery in the 19th century. This is the defining issue of our time, and at the pace that we're going right now, the climate crisis will unleash a level of destruction that humans have never seen. You can't be moderate on something like that. You can't be moderate on the end of the world. Small glimmers of hope that a global holocaust could be slightly averted, no biggie. Yeah, no biggie. The doom of our time. This is like if you were in Lord of the Rings universe and you were like moderate on Sauron. It's so frustrating because there's so many ways to sell the Green New Deal, you know, and that's what we ultimately need. We need a World War II New Deal level mass mobilization. We need our society to be completely changed over in order to adequately face the problem. How much hope does this give you? How much hope does this deal give you? Because it's something, right? It's not nothing. Cutting greenhouse gas emissions by 40% by 2030, that's a good first step. What cuts down my hope is, well, we still have to get through Sinema. Apparently Sinema and Mitch McConnell are really pissed about this because, well, on McConnell's end, Manchin and Schumer basically used the McConnell playbook, which shows you that the Democrats know how to wield their power and that they choose not to. So all of this, well, we don't have the vote, sentiment parliamentary, is all garbage. They know how to use the levers of power to get shit done. On Sinema's end, well, she's afraid of becoming Joe Manchin, so this is from the American Prospect. And it's somewhere in this, I'm not going to pick it up, whatever. Just read this piece. It's the American Prospect, very good. Basically in it, David Tatum talks about how Joe Manchin was in part shamed into doing this. Like, he was how do I put this? He was basically called out for being the villain for how long now? How long has it been that Joe Manchin's been the guy that killed Build Back Better? This is the guy that stopped jobs from happening. This is the guy that stopped prescription drugs from being negotiated. All these things. And he was sick of getting called out as being the villain in op-eds and so on. And now Kyrsten Sinema's in the Joe Manchin position of, is she going to be the one to torpedo this major climate legislation? In this article, it's like Joe Manchin was sick of being blamed for burning the world. So how much hope should this give us? In the big picture, I think that what this would do in isolation is push back the climate emergency a few years. Instead of human civilization collapsing by 2050, we're talking 2053, 2057. I'd like to say that I think that this will get the ball rolling, and I expect new climate legislation after midterms, after the 2024 election. But I don't. Oh, I can just see the people that voted for Biden because the TV told them that Joe Biden was safe, and that comforted their fear brain. I could just see those people just reading the headline, seeing the word historic and going, oh, Joe Biden's doing a good job, pat myself on the back for voting for him. I'm not going to think about the climate crisis anymore. I did my part. And then you find out the bill is like 2% of what it needs to be. Here's another alien perspective for you. Humans do not think in historical terms. We are very much absorbed by the moment, and we are very much biased by the culture and the environment that surrounds us. Listen, people in the 1850s who were voting for politicians who were moderate on slavery, they didn't see themselves as immoral. But we look today with clear eyes in a very different society, and it's like, how could you be moderate on slavery? How could you not be an abolitionist? People just a couple decades from now, living in a world that's being actively wrecked by the climate emergency, they're going to have those same clear eyes that we have on the slave society of the past. So with midterms coming up this year, with the presidential election just a couple years away, are you going to be today's version of somebody who voted for moderates on slavery? Or are you going to be this generation's version of an abolitionist, somebody that saw the historical moment that they're in and responded adequately by voting for the most progressive candidates whose climate policy actually matches up with the science and the problem that we face?